President Trump says the U.S. has a new peace plan to end the war in Ukraine, and he strongly urges Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelenskyy to sign on.
Yeah, we have a way of getting peace. We think we have a way of getting peace. He's going to have to approve it.
That's the president at the Oval Office yesterday. President Trump says he expects Zelenskyy to give an answer by Thursday. The U.S. plan provides some security guarantees for Ukraine, but it also codifies several long-standing Russian demands. NPR's Charles Maines is in Moscow. Charles, thanks for being with us.
Morning, Scott.
What do we know about this plan?
Well, first of all, it's a draft plan, and the White House officials have confirmed NPR's contents could change, but as it's publicly presented now, it's rather extensive. 28 separate points, something of a laundry list for post-conflict Ukraine, everything from when elections might be held to how Ukraine is rebuilt and who pays for it. But to actually stop the fighting, the key elements include calls for Ukraine to cede territory in the Donbass, including land that Russia has not been able to conquer in more than 3 years of fighting. It calls for limits to Ukraine's military, including caps on troops and certain weapons. And it calls for Ukraine to formally renounce ambitions to join NATO. All clearly Russian demands, which is perhaps not surprising, given that a Kremlin envoy helped draft it with White House officials.
Is there anything for Ukraine to like here?
Well, to a degree, yes. The plan also codifies Ukraine's right to try and join the European Union, which, as a sovereign country, it should have the right to do anyway. Also, security guarantees, including a provision that says an attack on Ukraine will be seen as an attack on the transatlantic alliance, at least for the next 10 years. So something like a temporary NATO Article 5 clause. That's something Ukraine has long wanted, even though there are questions and even doubts about how ironclad a promise like that would be.
You're in Moscow, of course, Charles. What's the reaction from Russians?
It's been a strange week. The more details that came out about this plan, the less the Kremlin had to say. That finally changed last night, though.
Полагаю, что и он может быть положен в основу окончательного мирного урегулирования.
So that's Russian President Vladimir Putin, heard here, who says the U.S. plan could be used as the basis for a final peaceful settlement, even as he went on to warn that details had not been discussed substantively with Russia. Now, Putin offered a theory why. He said it likely meant the U.S. had yet to convince Ukraine to accept the deal, but more ominously, he said it didn't matter. He said Moscow preferred diplomacy, but would achieve its goals in Ukraine militarily if need be.
And what about Ukraine's response? Because there are some enormous concessions you mentioned.
Yeah, huge concessions, and some would argue this plan essentially rewards the aggressor. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy issued a public statement to the nation last night, which he said the country was facing one of its most difficult moments. Let's listen.
Зараз Україна може опинитися перед дуже складним вибором. Або втрата гідності.
So here Zelenskyy says right now Ukraine may find itself facing a very tough choice, either losing its dignity or alienating its key partner, the U.S. But rather than immediately saying no to Trump, Zelenskyy said his focus would be on presenting counter-proposals.
NPR's Charles Maines in Moscow. Charles, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene announced last night she will resign in January. The Georgia Republican said that other than diverging from President Trump on a few issues, including the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files, she has been loyal to President Trump.
My voting record has been solidly with my party and the president. Loyalty should be a two-way street.
NPR's Ron Elving joins us. Ron, thanks for being with us.
Good to be with you, Scott.
In response to Representative Taylor Greene's announcement, President Trump called her a traitor on Truth Social this morning. Does this tell us something more about what's going on in the Republican Party?
Surely it's the cost of crossing swords with this particular president. Insisting on absolute loyalty has been a Trump trademark. But this falling out also says something about what's going on in the party. The remarkable unity that has bolstered Republicans in the Trump era has been tested not only by the Epstein files, but by deep differences over policy, especially foreign policy on Ukraine and most especially on Israel.
President Trump also this week took aim at some Democratic lawmakers, accusing them of sedition. over a video they released saying that members of the military are legally allowed to refuse unlawful orders. The president wrote in a post online, this is, quote, punishable by death. What kind of threat is this, especially at a time when we've seen violence against public figures, including President Trump himself?
It's akin to the way Trump has talked about people who defied him in the past, including the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the top uniformed officer of the United States, who refused to assist Trump's efforts to defy election results in 2020. Now, the fact is, our armed forces swear an oath to defend the Constitution and to follow orders so long as they are lawful. The challenge is what to do when orders clearly go beyond what is lawful.
President Trump on Thursday signed the bill allowing for the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files. Total reversal of his course, of course. What's next and when?
We're supposed to wait up to 30 days to see what's in the files, but there are a lot of question marks. What are the exceptions, the off-ramps, the special circumstances that might withhold some of the files or parts of them? Who's going to decide and who will review that decision, and who might push back if the files do not all come out?
The latest NPR PBS News Marist poll this week shows 80% of Americans have little or no confidence in Congress. Now, of course, we ought to add that political parties, the Supreme Court, the presidency, the media score only slightly better. What could this mean as we enter midterm campaigns?
Right now, Trump's poll numbers are falling, and they're right where they were 8 years ago, heading into a cycle where his party lost big and lost control in the House 2018. And the departure of Marjorie Taylor Greene and others signals a deeper unease within the GOP over the economy and the general perception of Trump's policies. Now, that means incumbents who usually would not have any trouble getting reelected might struggle this time, and that's good. Whichever party's in power, that's good for democracy. It means incumbents have to campaign and defend their votes. But Scott, let me walk back something I said last week. I said there were no more elections coming up before the next showdown and shutdown over health insurance. I should have said there were not any more multi-state election days or big tests or something like that, because there is a special election coming up in a deep red district in Tennessee. There's a Trump-endorsed Republican named Matt Van Epps, and a Democrat who's a state legislator from Nashville, and her name is Afton Bain. Trump won that district by 22 points in 2024, but polls show the current race tightening, and the voting is on December 2nd.
NPR's Ron Elving, thanks so much for being with us. Speak to you soon.
Thank you, Scott.
Welcome Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to the Oval Office this week. A reporter asked about Jamal Khashoggi. The Saudi journalist was murdered in 2018, according to U.S. intelligence agencies, in an operation approved by the Crown Prince. You're mentioning somebody that was extremely controversial, the president replied. A lot of people didn't like that gentleman that you're talking about. Whether you like him or didn't like him, things happen. Jamal Khashoggi came from a prominent Saudi family but fled his country in June 2017 after he'd become increasingly critical of his government. He said he'd been banned from using Twitter. He began to write columns for the Washington Post with a candid admission. It was painful for me several years ago when several friends were arrested, he wrote. I said nothing. I didn't want to lose my job or my freedom. I worried about my family. I have made a different choice now. I have left my home, my family, and my job, and I am raising my voice. To do otherwise would betray those who languish in prison. I can speak when so many cannot. The following summer, the Crown Prince lifted the traditional ban on women driving, but first, his government arrested numerous women's rights advocates, accusing them of nefarious contacts with foreign parties. The message is clear to all, wrote Jamal Khashoggi. Activism of any sort has to be within the government, and no independent voice or counter-opinion will be allowed. Everyone must stick to the party line. Just a few months after he wrote those words, Jamal Khashoggi entered the Saudi consulate in Istanbul to pick up documents for his marriage. His fiancée waited outside for him for hours. Jamal Khashoggi never got out of that building. But his voice went on. His last column, published after his death, called for free expression in the Arab world and warned that the region's governments have been given free rein to continue silencing the media. Jamal Khashoggi knew, as he wrote, that some powerful people could find his words not just extremely controversial, as President Trump put it, but threatening to their power. He wrote them anyway, whether they liked him or not.